Yeah. So, like I said, thank you for joining us for this parenting talk. Um, it's a very big pleasure for me to have Stephen Davies here, who would be sharing his experience on this very, 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 very uncommon topic. And one of the reasons why, I was so drawn to this is uh, I I think we've had this conversation, Stephen, when we were talking about how there's quite a lot of support for parents, especially for moms, but there's
Mm-hmm.
not much out there for dads. So in this sense, for us it was really an important topic to bring out and to share with others. And although we have here a mix of moms and dads in the group, I do hope that the techniques and the topics that will be shared can be something that we can share with other parents as well as other daddies. So probably we can just give in a few minutes of just introducing who's here, where are you from, and just a quick introduction before we give in to Stephen. So Boris.
That's an unfair introduction. I'm actually Lana's husband. So we live in the same place in Almere.
Okay. And would you want to just share a little bit about how this topic is close to you in that sense?
Well, I think for a lot of dads, it's difficult to really pinpoint that you have it or that you're close to it. For me, especially with the birth of our second child, our son, it was very difficult for me to connect with him after birth, with all the complications with it, and it took really a long time to come to a state with him that I really felt that he was my son.
Thank you. Claire, would you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. So I'm Claire. I am in Amsterdam. So what I do is I propose family support. So I support families here that have trouble with their children. I usually work with the mom and the dad whenever I can. So it's very interesting for me to attend this lecture because I see some dads who are getting sad or who are depressed for other reasons than the family life, but it affects the family life. So for me, it's a very interesting topic. And yeah, I have 2 children. I'm pregnant with the second one now. So that can be also interesting to make a lecture afterwards to my husband in case he gets sad.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
And we have Jeremy, the founder of Dreams You Do, the platform that we're using. Jeremy. Oh, I can't hear you. Jer, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, there.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Maybe it was my mic. Yeah, so I'm Jeremy Berman, and as Lana said, we have the pleasure of working together. So Dream CD is my platform, and I'm also a father. Like, not just a member, I'm also a client, or I'm also, it was a U.S. commercial. Anyway, I'm in the States. I'm in New York, and I've been to Amsterdam. I love it, but it's been way too long. So hopefully I can get a chance to visit. And yeah, so I have a 2-year-old, 27 months to be precise, and she's amazing. My wife and I had children a little later, 42. So I just got my wife pregnant right before I turned 40, which is kind of cool. Or we got pregnant together, I should say. Sounded crazy. But yeah, so it's kind of standard, I guess, in big cities, especially New York. Like a lot of friends of mine had children a little later. So it's like a whole slew of other considerations. We had a pretty healthy pregnancy. Sky is very healthy, but I feel energetic for my age, but I'm not 25 or 26 or 28. And so there's challenges there. I think that caused me to maybe have different anxieties than when I may have had when I was younger. I don't know if I've had depression, but I've definitely had anxiety, you know, especially like if she like falls or something and hits her head, or like the other day she did like apparently I wasn't there. She did like a whole backflip down 6 or 7 stairs. And my wife calls me to tell me, and I almost lost my mind. So I was trying to like not react as I usually do and freak out at my wife and kind of blame her, because we're not like helicopter parents, but I'm pretty hypervigilant around her on stairs because she can be, you know, she's young. She can be a little, she had a backpack on and she fell back. Anyway, she's fine, but I get anxious about certain things. And for the most part, I think I love being a parent. I'm pretty connected as a dad. I mean, I spend quite a bit of time with her. Having said that, I feel like my wife doesn't quite give me enough credit or see the time I spend with her. So a lot of the dissonance is with my partner, and it's very upsetting and challenging, and we're trying to work through that. I always say, well, compared to other dads, I'm like so tuned in. And she's like, why are you comparing yourself to other dads? And so I'm curious to learn. I love Lana's work. You know, I very rarely get a chance to do programs on my own platform, which I love doing. I've done a mindfulness program, and Lana told me all this months ago, and I kept getting the date wrong. And so I'm glad to be here. And really look forward to hearing insights from people, and hopefully learning some tips about monitoring my anxiety, and also like better understanding the relationship side too with being a new parent. So
Thank you. Jameer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, trying to post it.
Are you still there, Jam?
Yeah.
Can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
Can you see me?
No.
No.
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jameer. Sorry, I'm late. I'm a single mom for a 5-year-old toddler, and this is something interesting for me because for me, yeah, like I was telling Lana and Stephen, I think my dad went through it, depression, and it wasn't just after the birth, but I think it was also later on. Like, so when he was older, so even when we were older, I guess because it wasn't addressed, so there was that element there. So it's interesting to see that it's being talked about, that dads or guys can also have postnatal depression.
Thank you, Jam. And then we also have Edwin. He's muted, so I don't.
Yeah, we can fix that.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't expect a webcam. I'm actually on my old computer, so it doesn't have webcam currently. Can switch to a laptop if it's appreciated. So.
That's no.
Anyway, yeah, I live in Amersfoort, Netherlands. Have 2 kids, married. Pretty close friends with Lana Boris. I think I can safely say.
Yes.
Well, what do I expect? It's a very interesting topic. I never really thought it was something that's possible. I never even considered it. But if I look back, like I said, kids are 6 and 9. So and especially with my wife actually having been diagnosed with it, it's definitely been a rough start to the parenthood. And definitely had some times where I felt very low in energy, zombie-like. So looking back, I think it may apply, and I'm definitely curious to what everybody will speak out here.
Thank you, Edwin. And we also have Gino. Gino, can you hear me? And let's see. I don't know if Gino can share. Okay, maybe we can go back to Gino later on if he's there. But Stephen, how about you? Now it's your turn.
Okay. So, so can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Good,
Yes.
good. Right, okay, that's the most important thing. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I have 2 sons, age 9 and 6. I am a psychologist, and the reason I actually got onto this topic in the first place was because when I was a student, I'm a mature student at that, because I studied in the UK before. I'm originally from the UK, but I live just outside of Amsterdam, and I studied at the UvA, at the University of Amsterdam. And while I was studying there, my partner fell pregnant with our oldest child. So this is like going back 9 years ago, or 10 years ago now, sorry. And we realized pretty quickly that I was going to be staying at home looking after our son, because my wife was a teacher, she was earning all the money, and I was a poor student. So it was just around the time that I had to write a thesis, and I had to pick my subject for the thesis. I specialized in one of the areas that I had a kind of an affinity with was mood disorders, and so depression and the like. And then it suddenly came up in my mind of, okay, I'm going to be at home looking after a new baby. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Is there a possibility that fathers or potential fathers could get or experience either anxiety or mood disorders as a result of finding themselves in this position? Obviously, being an expat as well, being an international, I was away from all family members. My wife is also international, she's German, so we were isolated, as it were, in between our parents. So I looked into it, and it turned out that there was some literature, but very, very little literature at the time. I only managed to find about 25, I think it was about 25, maybe just less than 30 research papers that had ever been written about the subject before. But I used them to base to write my my thesis at the time, and since then it's kind of, yeah, it's the interest has snowballed. Coincidentally, there has also been an increase in research into this, and also an increase in interest, but primarily from the Scandinavian countries. There's also a little bit more study that's going on in Australia, in the UK, and more and more luckily in the Netherlands. I've tried to start myself. I know that there's another guy called Patrick who also hosts Father Evenings. So there is becoming this increasing awareness, as it were. And that's something that I continue to try and build. I've held a couple of workshops regarding this subject. It's a very, very broad subject. So what we'll be able to cover in the next sort of 45 minutes to an hour is I'm going to be using very broad brushstrokes to kind of give as much information as possible. And hopefully, but towards the end, I will hopefully also give a couple of practical pointers which can improve the situation, specifically more about depression. But what was mentioned before about communication, that is also that's going to be something that's going to be coming up. But yeah, you've got to start somewhere, I guess. So this is a good place to start. So I have a supporting presentation to go along with it. So should I share that with everyone now? Let me just see. First of all, I shall share my screen. This is what I want to share. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the presentation. How I've split it up is just to talk a little bit about fatherhood in general, then to talk a little bit about depression, and then zooming into not only to depression in general, but to focus on the differences between male and female depression. Oh, I see we have a new participant as well. Hello. Then to look at some of the causes, the effects, and the solutions. And like I say, it's quite broad brushstrokes, so I'm going to do my best to kind of give a takeaway by every section. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about each section, and then there's going to be a general takeaway. And if there's any, I don't know, Lana, if you think if there's any questions in between each section that would be useful, or should I wait for questions at the end?
If you have questions, you can also use the chat box to write down your questions, but just for the sake of continuity and also for fluidity of the presentation, I would be muting everyone, and if you have really some things that you would want to share, please write it down in the chat box, and then I can unmute you, and then we can do the discussion in that sense together with Stephen.
Perfect. Okay, so here we go.
It's yours, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the couple of things I wanted to focus on around fatherhood generally was first of all on the evolved fatherhood role, and the evolved parenting role, I think, is also a good way to look at it, and that idea of sort of life as usual, because we don't just have kids and everything else stops, but everything else continues. So when I first started doing presentations about this and workshops about this, I started highlighting the fact that the role of the father has actually developed quite significantly in the last few decades. I always make a comparison to how I experienced my father, how his interaction in the family. He was more of a traditional working family man, left the home quite early in the morning and reappeared sometime later in the evening where to have his tea, and then sometimes he'd go off and work again in the evening. He was there. He did stuff with us occasionally, but the idea of my mother being the main sort of upbringer of the family was quite predominant in our family. And when we found out that we were pregnant, my partner and I had more of this idea that I wanted to be more involved in the parenting role myself. And I think also that was something that I was noticing around me. That it's certainly something that is, seen a lot more in media. There's a lot more articles about these things. It's seen a lot more in films and in television series and stuff like that. This idea that the father is more involved, and so. And I'd seen it with a few friends. I was one of there hadn't been many friends before me who'd had kids in my social network, but I'd seen it with them. And the one thing I found that during the pregnancy, I went to all of the scans together with my partner, and all the information was directed towards her. I was sat next to her the whole time. I was trying to participate, but all the information was being directed towards her. And while I was thinking in the back of my head, obviously understandable during the pregnancy, that the mother is the most important, but there was never a question as to how I was feeling about the situation, which I think would have been kind of supportive. Then the whole birth process as well. Again, there was lots of kind of focus on my wife, understandably again, and I think, and I've heard also from other men as well, that you kind of, as the man, you kind of feel like this helpless extension of your partner. You're not really able to do anything. You're not in a position to be able to do anything, obviously, because you're not skilled enough to do it. But and we attended the prenatal classes. It was actually a Dutch course called Samen we Vallen, which means giving birth together. and pretty much everything that had been discussed in those didn't really seem to give us anything to hold on to during the actual birth process. Like I say, I have 2 children. My wife had a natural birth both times. The first time was a little bit more stressful than the second time. The second birth was actually a home birth, which is very common in the Netherlands. But it was, every time it was like I was just sort of sitting there and hoping for the best and trying to be as encouraging as possible, but still feeling that you're not quite doing enough. And then the postpartum and further, definitely in my case, was I was after 9 weeks, my wife went back to work. We had like a district nurse who came around for the first week, like a carer that came around for the first week. And again, all the information that was being given about care for our son was being directed towards my wife. And I was thinking, but in a few weeks' time, it's going to be me who's taking over the reins. I was paying attention, but it didn't really feel like there was that much attention for how I was feeling, how I was coping, how I was dealing with the situation. And all these things kind of fed into this idea of, okay, I'm obviously I had good communication with my partner, so we made sure that I knew what I was doing as well, and she was able to share the tasks with me, so I knew exactly what I was doing. But it gave me the impression that, if other fathers find themselves in that position, then perhaps it could lead to some issues. And of course, even with the changes in the father role, life still continues. In my case, I was a student, but there are many fathers who still continue working, maybe as primary earner, some maybe as part-time worker, maybe some who are going to be a stay-at-home father. The home situation, obviously, when you've got a kid, then there's all the other things don't just stop. You still need to continue. The relationship is something that needs continuing work as well. I think when you find yourself when the baby comes along, then essentially that is an extension to the family, but there is still a relationship that needs to be maintained between mother and father, and less time to do it. And the personal lifestyle of parents is also or can also be largely impacted by the arrival of children. It really depends on the individual, of course, and also can depend on how many children you have. One thing we definitely noticed was that the personal life was impacted more after the second as opposed to the first. Right, okay. Okay, so on to the next thing. Right. Okay. So basically, the take home from the dad section is basically this idea of that the role of the father has and continues to change, which and essentially I find that a very positive thing. I find it very positive for families, both parents, that the role of parenting is shared, and also very important for the kids, that the kids get that equal kind of the development of the role model, both from the mother and the father. However, the one thing that I definitely noticed and that I've highlighted, that I highlight today and in other sessions I've had, is that the support for the expectant fathers, especially in the Netherlands, I can't speak for any other countries, but especially in the Netherlands, it's kind of ad hoc. It's like, oh yeah, you're there too, and quite often forgotten. One very clear message, or one very clear indication for me during the pregnancy of our kids was when I mentioned to our midwife that I was studying postnatal depression in fathers, and she said, oh, does that exist? Kind of, yeah, that kind of highlighted it very, very
I
bluntly.
just want to share my sadness in hearing that. You've mentioned that already when we started talking about this, and
Yeah.
it just breaks my heart to have that dismissiveness too.
Yeah, it was like I think at the time this is going back 10 years. So it might be that knowledge has changed. I didn't really feel that she, just to clarify, I did actually find her a very nice midwife. I found she was very supportive to my wife, but it was more that kind of, that lack of further education, or that lack of further exploration, as it were, and I find sometimes, I think it happens in most professions. You kind of roll into your profession, and you learn the knowledge, and you're very skillful in the things that you do, and very skillful in the things that, because of your experience. But things change, and if you don't go with the changes, then or if you don't adapt and follow those changes as they happen, then obviously you can miss information, and you can't know everything. Like, even as a psychologist, I'm constantly learning new stuff. It's just part and parcel of the kind of profession. But it's like, I do hope that me telling her this educated her to learn a little bit more about it in the future. So, to go on to the next focus. So the next focus is the sadness, is to the depression itself. And there's just a couple of topics that I want to talk about here. Depression in itself is, it's a very, very common disorder, unfortunately. It's also, I feel, a very, it can be a very misunderstood word, depression. And I hear very frequently from clients and from people around me as well, the statement, I felt really depressed yesterday. And that's fine. I can understand people can experience that sort of that feeling, but I often try and clarify whether they actually felt depressed, or if they felt sad or somber or down, because depression really is, if we focus on it in a more of a purely sort of clinical way, to experience a depression requires you to experience 5 of 9 symptoms which identify depression, which include sadness itself, which include loss of interest, which include fatigue and tiredness, loss of appetite or an increase of appetite, loss of sleep or an increase in sleep, loss of concentration, feelings of guilt, or hopelessness or helplessness, like an agitation or retardation in motoric, in the way in movement, and experience of thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide. And people have to experience these for a continuous period of 2 weeks. 5 of these 9 symptoms. Not all of them have to be present. The ones that there's 2, at least one of them has to be present. That's the sadness or the loss of interest. And so then I kind of highlight that, but that happens a lot as well. There are still a lot of people who get depressed, but it's that is more of a as it were, just a more a clarified version of what depression actually is. But it's experienced by a lot of people. It's the World Health Organization, estimates that between 4 or 5% of the world population are probably suffering from a depression at this moment. It's around 300 million people that suffer from depression. And that is just like, obviously that's varying lengths of depression. Some people experience it for a shorter time than others. There is obviously these are just like single examples. Lifetime prevalences tend to be higher It's estimated that at least 1 in 5 people in the world will experience a depression at some point in their life. And depression doesn't always need treatment. There's quite a large amount of people who will experience what's called spontaneous recovery. It tends to be higher in younger people, in kids and adolescents, but the figures are still relatively high. I believe between a third and a half of people will recover from the depression without any intervention, so without any medication, without any treatment. And what is shown in numerous research is that the ratio tends to be higher in females than males, on an average of about 2 to 1. However, that's something that's potentially debatable, and for that we go on to the next slide, and that's the idea of depression in males. What is the current argument, or the current debate that's being put forward, is that the symptoms, a lot of the symptoms that identify depression are more female-centric. The display of emotion, and things like that, which are more to be discussed by females. And that there are certain other different symptoms which may be more male specific. The idea of aggression, and whether that's aggression towards the partner. It could be, in a case of parenting, it could be aggression towards a child, unfortunately, or even aggression just finding the male finding themselves getting into fights with random people, or it could also be a focus on work, the more workaholic type, which is then seen as more of an avoidant thing to get out of the situation, which makes you feel down or depressed, and focus on the thing where you maybe get more feeling of success. Increased substance use, whether that's alcohol or drugs or whatever. These can also be signs of a depression in a man. Or engaging in extramarital affairs. Of course, these are don't necessarily have to be symptoms of depression, but there has been some research done which has identified that these can be symptoms which would identify depression more in males than in females. The argument also that men may be less open to admit depression, or even aware of the symptoms. But the one thing that kind of, going back to that kind of idea of the ratio of females experiencing more depression than males, if you look at the actual suicide rates, then that is predominantly males who successfully complete a suicide attempt, 4 times higher. In the most recent statistics, it's 4 times more likely that a man will commit suicide than a woman. I was looking at some statistics that were taken in the UK, and it was around 78% of men and 22% of women in the last 5 years or something like that that have successfully committed suicide. So there has to be something to make that figure so high, and the chances are that it's undiagnosed depression. If we go on to postnatal depression itself, the postnatal depression is seen as just a major depressive episode, so it's exactly the same symptoms. Obviously, there's like when you have a kid, or when you've just had a kid, then the chance that you're tired and fatigued is very high. Also, the chance that your sleeping patterns have been hugely disturbed is also very common, which can also then have an adverse effect on your eating patterns. So it has to be there has to be some care taken as well to understand exactly what's a symptom and what is simply a consequence of becoming a new parent. The DSM recognizes postnatal depression as something that happens within 4 weeks postpartum, so 4 weeks after the birth. Although again, that's been debated. There have been researchers which have looked also into prenatal examples of depression, and the idea of postnatal depression that can also occur and continue or be uncovered later after the birth of the child. So there's it's kind of a grey area there. I've put the percentage for this is the 13% of suffering mothers. That's the prevalence of postnatal depression according to recent statistics. I've left a question mark for the suffering fathers, and maybe you can use the chat function now to give me your guesstimate as to what that would be.
Any guesses on how much?
The prevalence of postnatal depression suffered by men, according to recent research. Any ideas? A percentage?
Okay, Jeremy says probably similar or more than women.
Okay, Claire says about the same.
Is it?
5% from Edwin. Okay, right. Okay, it's about 10%. But that said, there has been a lot less research done on men. When I actually did my thesis, the percentages that were being recorded were anything between 1.3% and 27.5%. Obviously, the difference in these percentages depends heavily on the type of population that are chosen to represent the study. So the 27.5%, they probably chose a lot of individuals who were actually maybe earmarked as potential people with depression. I'm going to give you a little look at the. 1 second, if I can move forward. Whoopsie daisy. Let's see. Right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a look at. Oh dear, come on. There we go. Just a little bit of screen manipulation now. This is what's called the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale. It is, there we go. I think everyone should be able to see this. This is a standard scale that is given to new mothers after they've given birth. Definitely in the UK. I'm not sure about in other countries. I don't believe my wife was given this. She might have been asked the questions, but now I can see Lana shaking her head. She's never seen it before. Let's have a little look through the questions. It's the idea is to score it based on the last 7 days. The questions which like question 1 and 2. So question 1, I've been able to laugh and see the funny side of things as much as I always could, always to all the way up to not at all. All these are scored from 0, so from 0 as much as I always could to 3 to not at all, so 1 and 2 in the middle. And then the scores with an asterisk are scored the other way. So I have blamed myself unnecessarily when things went wrong. Yes, most of the time gets a 3, and no, never gets a 0. The idea is that the individual goes through the questionnaire and in the last 7 days answers the question based on their own experience, and then they end up with a score at the end. A score of 10 or higher indicates potential depression. So it's something that is aimed more towards obviously towards the mothers, but it has been used also in research with fathers, and it's been seen to be quite a reliable little questionnaire. Okay, so we shall move on. If anyone wants to oh sorry. Is what also a practice done with dads, the EPDS?
Yes, the survey. Did they even consider giving it to dads?
They have used this. This is one of the main questionnaires out there for postnatal depression, and it has been used in research with fathers, and fathers have also scored. It's found to be what they call reliable with the father population as well. So a score of 10 or over registered by a father is also quite a reliable indicator of depression in that individual. And it's because it's scored over the past week, then it also then becomes quite a reliable indicator for improvement. So if they have therapy or if they're screened on a number of occasions, then there's an idea of if the situation is improving or deteriorating. Unfortunately, the one thing, like I say, that doesn't seem to get done regularly with fathers is the screening. So they just don't get the question out, which would be very, very simple to share, I think. There is a Dutch translation as well. Okay, so, sorry, I'm just got to move on to the next one. So from the sadness, the takeaway is the idea that depression is a very common issue, unfortunately. But that male depression doesn't always seem to present itself in the same way as it does in females, and the idea that symptoms of aggression, substance abuse, overworking, and extramarital affairs can just be seen as potentially as acting out behaviour rather than symptoms of depression. Postnatal depression in men, the statistics are not that dissimilar to those in females. So it would be wise to follow up more. Looking at the causes within the psychology that I've been trained. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist. We focus on what's called the biopsychosocial model. So that the idea of the biopsychosocial model is to look at the potential causes from multiple areas. It's multifaceted. Starting with the biological. Just actually before I get onto biological, there was, when I was doing my research in the first case, I was talking to people about it, and quite a few people said to me, yeah, but men aren't going to get postnatal depression in the same way that women do because, first of all, they don't have babies, and so they don't have that hormonal change. It's widely recognized that one of the aspects of potential postnatal depression in females is the hormonal changes that occur going through the pregnancy and then after birth. At the time, I agreed with everyone and said, yeah, well, there are, of course, it's multifaceted. So if it's not from the hormonal part, then the psychological and the social aspects could definitely play a role. However, I'm going to talk about hormones in a minute. From the genetic perspective, there is quite a large agreement that with mental health issues, that genetics do play some sort of a role. That if there is a history of mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety in either parent, then there is a chance that can be passed on through the genetic makeup. I believe the current assessment is that it can be held, it's around 40% likelihood of an increased vulnerability for having a depression or any other mental health disorder if one of your parents has it. However, that is an increased vulnerability. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person is going to get it, but it just means that there's a potential there. Regarding that hormones, one thing, those hormones, in the last few years, there have obviously been more studies done. These studies weren't out when I first did my thesis, but when I started looking into it, I actually found out that not only females go through the obvious hormone changes when they're pregnant and when they're having babies, but apparently so do the fathers. And the things that have actually been found is that when you are an expectant father, when men are expectant fathers, that in the weeks up until their partner's about to give birth, males can experience a decrease in testosterone, the male sex hormone. In some cases, in the research that's been done and it's been measured by in the test subjects, it was found that testosterone levels went down by up to a third of their normal level. This could be like, this is the reduction of testosterone is probably to develop more of that kind of paternal bonding. Testosterone is normally associated with more aggressive responses. In men, it's the more macho kind of hormone. So reduction could be as kind of more of a protectionist method. There's a new baby on its way, so there's going to be they're going to be more cuddly and more receptive to the child. It can also, as a side effect, it can also trigger that vulnerability in men that are more susceptible to experiencing depression. Estrogen, the female sex hormone, is also present in males. And it's the only time that men will get an increase in estrogen in their system is during the pregnancy of their partners. In some males, apparently, I don't think I experienced this myself, but in some males can actually go through some pregnancy-like symptoms, such as unsuspected weight gain and feelings of nausea. Partner is pregnant, so that's quite that was quite an interesting fact that I didn't know. Cortisol, for those of you who haven't heard of cortisol, it's the stress hormone. It's a very common hormone that's produced, and as you probably understand, when in expectant parents, in expectant fathers, that cortisol level can rise towards the end of the pregnancy because they are also maybe a little bit worried or apprehensive at the fact that their partner's about to go through the birth-giving process. After the birth itself, then the stress hormone drops. It plummets like a stone. And that kind of quick change in the cortisol limit can have a disbalancing effect in itself. There have also been two other been identified in males around pregnancy. One is called vasopressin, which is apparently a hormone, which is the vasopressin is reduction, and vasopressin is normally is involved in planning and organization in the brain, apparently. So yeah, I always use the example I use in explaining this one is when I was driving my wife to the hospital for the birth of our first child, I completely missed the exit on the motorway. So obviously my vasopressin levels must have been very low because I wasn't very organized, even though I'd gone through the route hundreds of times in my head. Vasopressin, though, is also associated with low-level aggression. And finally, prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone which is very useful for females as it helps in the production of breast milk. It's useless in males and it can have an effect on libido and erectile dysfunction, and can also influence mood. So this kind of idea that males don't go through hormonal changes in some respect or another was kind of quashed when I started reading this research. So again, that's something that isn't very well known. So the psychological model, obviously this one is huge. I'm just going to skip over, go through it as quickly as possible. we all have our own temperaments. Temperaments can be things like sensitivities, adaptabilities, our activity levels, whether we're introvert or extrovert, our persistence. All these kind of things can have an effect on the ways we respond to changes in life and to how we respond to the introduction of a new member of the family. And the life history, obviously, of an individual can also have an effect on whether that is specifically rooted in personal childhood experiences, whether there's very negative childhood experiences which then kind of get triggered when expecting your own offspring, or whether it's a very positive childhood experiences which then set the bar exceptionally high for yourself as a parent, that you as a parent say, right, okay, my parents were so good to me, I have to be just as good, if not better, to my kids. But obviously, with the changing roles, then things are thrown around a little bit. One thing I didn't mention before is the changing role of the mother. The fact that there are more and more working mothers now than there were a few decades ago also has an impact on these parenting roles. So from the psychological model, there can be a whole host of insecurities or questions that are thrown up. When the child actually arrives, then there can be more insecurities from the father's side, the feelings of exclusion, the feelings of replacement. Again, these can all be things that are triggered by an individual's life history, or by an individual's the way that they view themselves in the family, or the way that they see themselves being replaced in the family. These are all very specific, so that's why I'm not going to go too much into detail with them, but they're very individual. And then the social model, that's obviously the idea of family support. How much family support's around. If you have parents or parents-in-law that live around the corner, if they're supportive at all, or if you're an expat, if you're an international that lives in a foreign country, and that kind of social support is a plane ride or a few hours drive away. The social network in itself of friends and other people around you, and whether they're in the same situation that you find yourself, if they're willing to support, if you actually want them to support, of course. Within that social network is also the intimate relationship, so the relationship between yourself and your partner, which is undoubtedly impacted by having a child, whether it's in a positive way, in a negative way, or whether that kind of changes. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. These things are all they can all change. They can all be triggered. We can as we go through these parenting changes. And work obviously plays an important part in the social aspect of causing a depression as well. How nice is the employer? Are they going to give you extra time off if you need time off to look for your kids? Kids can get sick. Kids can be unpredictable. Kids can get hurt. Is the employer going to work together with the parents to make sure that they feel supported in this case, or are they not? And work in itself, like, if work becomes or remains as important, or becomes more important than the child, then obviously that can lead to conflict as well. So there's kind of like, these are only a few examples like I say, the topic is so broad. I could talk about this for a couple of hours, but it's just to give a kind of idea. The kind of take home from this, really, from the cause model, is that it is so multifaceted. It comes from so many different angles. What I've put down for myself as a kind of a little quote is that men are actually just as complicated as women. No offense to the women that are on the conference, but we're as individuals, we're all super complicated. And as the research is showing, men can go through these hormonal changes. Males also have very differing temperaments and personalities, and we all have, as individuals, we all have our own personal experience. And next to that, we all have the external social factors, which can impact us in many ways, and the way that the social situations that impact us is again linked to the psychological build-up and all that sort of stuff. So there's links within everywhere. Critically, one of the main causes, and one of the main causes, referring back to postnatal depression, then one of the main causes that was identified in the research papers that I found for postnatal depression in either partner was postnatal depression in the other partner. So regardless of whether it was the male or female that was suffering from some form of depression, and this could have been also during the pregnancy, there was a higher risk for the other partner experiencing some form of depression as a result. So that's again one of the, and that falls then heavily on that social aspect. So on to the effects. I'm just going to check the time. Wow. Okay. Well, the time is flying. I knew it would. So the effects of depression are exactly the same as the effects of postnatal depression. So and I've just, again, these are very, very broad, but I'm just going to try and sort of skim through them a tiny little bit. Health, one of the things that's been recognized with any kind of prolonged period of suffering from depression is physical risks as well. A weakened immune system has been highlighted in a number of researches. These tend to be more prolonged cases, the ones where they don't spontaneously recover, and where and maybe they don't search for help early enough. Heart problems as well have been found in people who have suffered from prolonged periods of depression, and sexual problems have also been found as well. Again, that idea of the reduction of the libido can occur in both males and females when serious depression is experienced. From the relationship perspective, depression can have a huge impact on sexual intimacy. It can also we have a couple of comments here. You can see what those are. How about with anxiety? That's a good question. When I was doing my, I will just interject there a little bit about anxiety. When I was doing my research into postnatal depression and in fathers, there were a number of studies which looked at both depression and anxiety. Like depression and anxiety in themselves are two of the most common issues that are faced in the kind of mental health spectrum. The two most common, I think, for individuals that experience mental health issues, and there tends to be what we call comorbidity between the two. comorbidity basically means that they kind of overlap each other. So, although that said, I haven't studied postnatal anxiety, which I don't actually know if postnatal anxiety exists as a clinical definition. But it, of course, it's not surprising to understand that people feel anxious as a result of having of becoming fathers or mothers. Because it's a massive change in your life, and there's obviously questions that come up and concerns. So it's not really I can't really give you a very straight answer to that question, Jeremy, because I've focused more on depression, but understandably I'd say that there are similar issues that are experienced. Claire asked about the weight of the lack of sleep in the causes of postnatal depression. Again, that's another very it's kind of a chicken and egg situation with sleep and depression. Which one comes first? Is it first the depression that influences the sleep, or is it the sleep that influences the depression? That's a tough one because there are a number of definite side effects for prolonged lack of sleep. The body doesn't react very well to losing out on sleep over a prolonged period of time. I know from personal experience, my youngest child, for the first 2.5 years of his life, woke up between 4:30 and 5:30 every morning without fail, and that was incredibly tough to deal with. That was probably my period where I struggled the most as a father, and we were glad that when he finally turned 2.5, that suddenly it changed. But I can understand that it can have a massive impact on mood. But whether that's, because again, that's only one symptom, whether it's the only factor there, I think there has to be a certain amount of vulnerability there for it to cause depression outright. Jeremy, your question: if one partner is experiencing anxiety, I think and if that can have a knock-on effect. What they found with the risk for depression was if there's one partner who is as it were, kind of goes out of the running due to depression, if they feel too overwhelmed to be able to deal with the responsibilities of parenting because of fatigue, or because of that kind of sadness, or because of like lack of concentration, and things become more difficult and more and harder to deal with, then the other one has to pick up more of the slack, as it were. And it's a bit of a harsh term. I don't like to say that, because obviously a person who experiences depression, it's not their fault. They haven't asked for it, so they're not creating slack for another one to pick up. But it puts extra pressure on the partner to kind of step up. And there has been there is a kind of myth that depression is contagious. And I would like to confirm that is actually a myth. You can't, by being around a sad person, you can't, or a person who has depression, you can't catch depression from them. The depression mainly comes from where you overextend your limits then by going out of your way to help the other individual. So with anxiety, I think if you're seeing your partner acting in a very anxious way towards a child, or or towards yourself, or feeling very anxious about the way that they're feeling about their performance as a parent, then that can have it can kind of sow a seed of doubt in the other individual potentially as well. That it could that in a kind of effort to calm the anxiety of the person, that there could be other doubts that creep into that individual. So that there could be a potential knock-on effect as well. I don't know if it's been researched. It's definitely something that would be worthwhile researching. That would be something worth looking into, seeing if there's any papers. But I could, I could potentially see a link between the anxiety of one parent influencing or being a risk factor to the anxiety in another. They're very similar issues, anxiety and depression.
How can you get someone to help to get the other parent to get help if they are refusing to acknowledge?
Oh, yeah. Yes, very good question. The stigma of depression. Yeah, it's something that I battle against constantly as a professional as well. How can you get someone to? It's a very good question. It's like through my experience as a psychologist, you can sometimes the intervention of multiple persons is necessary to highlight to another exactly what they should be recognizing in themselves. So it potentially, it's not just a job for the partner themselves to get their parent to recognize that they are experiencing or potentially experiencing a depression, but also to see if other people recognize that as well. Oh, wow, you're really fighting a battle there. If the family's also against the son getting help, yeah. Unfortunately, I've had a number of clients during my career that were sent for help, were sent for psychological help, and they're the ones that get very little out of psychological support, because they're just not open to it. It's and then it can take something bigger to happen, or something more more dramatic to happen, in order for them to see the necessity of getting support. It's it's kind of like the metaphor of you can lead the horse to water, but you can't necessarily make them drink. You can't give someone support if they're not open to getting support, unfortunately. That's a really tough one, Jameer. I wish I did have an answer to that one. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go back to my slides, because I haven't even got onto the support bit yet. So in the relationship as well, one of the things can be that reduction in positive communication, and as I've already said, the development in depression in the other partner. I need to click back on here. Another thing that came up in my research was the impact that postnatal depression, like it's been well documented, the impact that postnatal depression in females can have on the offspring. But in the researches that I found, it also found that postnatal depression in men, especially over a long period of time that goes untreated, can have an impact on the development of the child. And that is partially due to reduced interaction with infants. If the person is feeling so down that they just don't feel that they are up to, or they feel overwhelmed in the idea of interacting with small children. There's been a couple of researchers that also identified that if that's the case as well, if one partner's depressed, if the father's depressed, then it can also impact the mother's interaction with the children as well, that they are I think with the example that was given, that the mothers can be less likely to read to the children because the partner's depressed, that there's that kind of, as it were, just a mini knock-on effect, even if the mother isn't feeling depressed in herself. They also they found a very interesting link between vulnerability and behavioural problems between if fathers are depressed and the development of the sons, although there's been no link made between the depression of the mother and specific behavioural issues with either girls or boys. So that's a very specific one between fathers and sons, and I don't know why that is. Okay, oops daisy, sorry. Right, okay, so from effect, the kind of takeaway for this is, obviously I think most people are aware of the well-known sort of like knock-on side effects, health effects from depression, but also that depression can influence intimate relationships, can reduce libido, can interfere with positive communication styles, and could also trigger depression in the vulnerable partner. So in that respect, it can be part of the cause and it can be part of the effect. So a cause of depression in one is depression in the other, and an effect of depression in one can be depression in the other. And it's very importantly, it's been shown to have negative consequences for the child's development, and that the depression of the father has been shown to have an independent negative effect on the child's development. So even if the mother is functioning normally and not experiencing any form of depression, just depression in the father, and that the exposure of the child to that, if it goes untreated, can have a negative knock-on effect on the kids. So that kind of highlights the importance of recognition of postnatal depression in fathers, because of the potential impact it can have not only on the relationship and not only on the health of the father, but also on the development of the child, which is why I'm doing webinars like this. The solutions, onto the positive stuff. The first one is very clear. It's what we're doing today. It's awareness, it's education, it's acceptance. It happens slowly. I think I've held maybe four or five of these talks. I've tried holding workshops myself. I speak to fathers and try and tell mothers and tell everyone who I talk to when it comes down to parenting about the things that I study and the things that I'm interested in, just to try and spread that awareness. Luckily, there are more companies that are doing it. There are more initiatives that are starting, and they will continue to make people more aware in different countries. There's a in the University of Amsterdam now, there's a professor of fatherhood. But I don't think these kind of things, I don't think postnatal depression in fathers is part of the agenda. I think it's more looking at how fathers can get more of an equal balance of time with their kids, and how the government can be encouraged to give parents fathers more parental leave, which I believe is also going up from when the next cabinet eventually forms. So that's one thing. From the so the solutions for countering depression and also for countering anxiety, because these are things that are there's only really kind of two that I can give you today, which are and there are many others, but I had to be a bit choosy. These are the ones which I find are it gets to the core of the problem pretty quickly. From the physical health perspective, most people groan when I say this, but getting out and getting active has been shown to be very beneficial for all sorts of mental health issues. Next to being a psychologist, I'm a qualified running therapist. I became a qualified running therapist for that reason, because and also when I practice my psychology, I practice it while walking out in different green areas and parks in and around Amsterdam and other areas of the Netherlands. And when we talk about physical health, and especially physical health that reflects sort of or improves and has a maintaining improvement on mental health, then we're not actually talking about a massive investment in time. You don't have to go and join the nearest boot camp training and run yourself into the ground. The research, because there's been quite a lot of research that's been done on this as well, has shown that it doesn't matter actually if it's aerobic or anaerobic exercise. So it could be running, but it could also be doing weightlifting or push-ups or calisthenics. They've also found that things like yoga and Tai Chi can have a very positive effect on physical health, and a very positive and maintaining effect on mental health and depression and anxiety. Obviously, it depends on how serious the condition is, on how serious the complaints are. But if there are mild sort of complaints, then the application of exercise in with a minimum, and it has to be at least a minimum of 20 minutes per day on 3 days per week. But there's no need to experience any pain or fatigue. The ideal kind of it's all about raising your heart rate. It's about raising the sort of the coherence in the heart, and that is achieved by only raising the heart rate by, I think it's about doubling your resting heart rate, which can be achieved by walking briskly. It doesn't necessarily, you don't even have to run. Let's see what's more. Yeah, it would. Like I guess everyone can see Claire's chat there. Funnily enough, professional athletes when they retire from sport are very, very vulnerable to depression, because the beneficial effects of sport are actually more. There's more effect on people who are less fit and who are less active, because there is less of that activation required to start sparking the endorphins, which is the feel good hormones in the neurotransmitters in the brain, and the dopamine, which make us feel better. Whereas professional athletes and professional sports people, because they're so well trained, and because it's almost like they kind of become immune to very small efforts of activity. But that's I think that works better for the people who are less active. If you by just getting that little bit of activity, and then you can have a really positive effect on any depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. Like I say, assuming on depending on how serious they are. Jeremy, could you confirm that in a second? More talk about what? About professional sportsmen giving testimonials, or
just about I mean, about having depression post-career, but it's not related. So it kind of conflates the idea of like sharing as a man I think her point was so that it gives more like notoriety to the issue because they're famous and they are revered. But that could conflate it, because I was saying that the focus is on a little bit more depression because all these guys have been committing suicide that are like famous, even like superstar athletes. But a lot of it's because, a lot of head trauma with the concussions and stuff. And so
is that with the NFL players and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay. Right. So for the improved communication, I've this is actually what's coming as thank you very much for that link, Edwin. I'll have a little look at that. Chris Kirkland, I think he used to play for Liverpool. Regarding improved communication, now this is something that I provided as part of as a handout. Because communication, if it's impacted between partners, then there can be more negative communication that occurs. I'll see if I can actually find my let's see, how can I do what I'll do. I'm going to stop share there, and then I'm going to share and find it. Where is it? Let's see if I can open it up for 1 second.
Stephen, I also uploaded the file that you sent to me.
Oh yeah.
Yes, so
Is
it's
it
also
possible for people to see that?
Okay, let's see. Let me just.
It's alright. I found it now.
Oh, this one.
Right. Okay. I'll just share it with everyone.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. So, can I move this bar out of the way of it? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So, there's like the handout, you can look through it, and it looks at the different types of communication that we can have. Obviously, communication is a vital part of our lives. It's also something that's that kind of gets neglected as well at times, not only in intimate relationships, but also in working atmospheres and stuff like that. It can be a very positive thing, but it can also be very negative. And then there's a few categories of how we typically classify a communication to subassertive, aggressive, and it's assertive communication. But for this means I've created what's called a TLC communication. And there's also a little bit about communication styles that you can better avoid, which are and they're kind of some examples of those, so you can read through that. But I want to focus on the partner communication with TLC, and TLC stands for time, location, and content. Three of the what I think are, like, obviously the time and the location are critical to communication. Timing is just so important. What you discuss when. And also considering whether it's good to communicate something at a specific time. If we are typically when we are in the heat of an argument or in the heat of emotional communication, then what tends to happen is our rational thought processes are less available to us. That's a whole discussion in itself, but the essential, like when we are triggered emotionally, the limbic system of our brain, which is more central in our brain, is triggered, which and we react more from an emotional standpoint. If it reaches, like, especially if it reaches things like conflict, then we can. And we feel very emotionally triggered, then there have been analogies made of us basically lobotomizing ourselves with emotion, which shuts off our ability to plan and organize exactly what we want to say. So timing is in that regard critical. I'm sure we've all experienced moments where we've had maybe a heated discussion with someone and not known what to say, or said completely the wrong thing, And then about 20, 30 minutes after we've had the discussion, then we've known exactly what we should have said when the ration kicks back in, and we can think, we can plan. The point I put across, if it's not a good time to talk, or if you don't want to talk in the heat of the moment, then the best thing to do is to agree to discuss it at a later time, to make an appointment, to stick to that appointment, and to make sure there's enough time to talk. The worst times to communicate, especially to communicate something important, is when one person is ready to grab their coat and head out the door. Location is also very important. Oh, let's see, we have a comment. A precise example related to postpartum depression, or that, like a communication kind of example, you mean, Claire? Yes, right. Yeah, there's some in the content. Then I've got a couple of examples. Just to cover the location quickly, it's when we're talking location, then especially if you want to talk something parenting wise, or something that you're unhappy with, then it's normally best to do those things in private, I think. So you don't really want to start a conversation like that when you're in the middle of a cafe, or if you're in the middle of a street. Then again, that's the kind of thing that you, when you discuss timing, is this the right time to have this conversation? No, let's have this when we're at home, and potentially let's have it when the child's in bed, or when the kids are playing somewhere, so we can actually have a proper conversation, and we're not going to get interrupted every few minutes with the kids running in and out, or where the kids could be witness to us getting frustrated with one another. So that's why location is important. In regards to the content, the basic steps to follow with content is to consider the factual stuff. So if you want to make a comment about someone's behavior, or if you want to make a comment about something someone says, or an action that someone, examples I've given, then you want to describe that as clearly as possible, and as accurately as possible. So that reduction of assumption, you're not going to say, well, you said this, you meant this, or when you accuse me of this, you want to say, when you said XXX. So when you said, yeah, whatever, or when you took the baby from me. This could be a potential situation between mothers and fathers, where the father has a baby, the baby starts crying, and the mother comes along and says, oh, give him or her to me. These can trigger situations in fathers where they think, okay, and why can't I do that then? And these are situations like this are what we refer to as, or what are referred to as, maternal gatekeeping. These are situations where females take over a more what they see as a maternal role. They're the mother, so they can calm a baby down better than a father can. Not necessarily true. Not necessarily wrong either, but it's dependent on the individual, and it's but these can be so these can be the kind of things that are mother-in-law gatekeeping. Okay, so yeah, that's a bit of a different one. Yeah. Yeah, I think I experienced that too, but that's where this kind of communication comes in very important. Another thing about this communication is the source as well, communicating it to the person that's actually that you have the grievance with, or the one that is maybe causing the upset, rather than discussing it with. If it's about a mother-in-law, then it's good to talk about to the mother-in-law, rather than talk to the partner about her mother, because that can then lead to more conflict, even though that can be quite difficult as well, to talk to the mother-in-law. So when you describe the factual account of what's happened, then you say how that makes you feel in the first person, and that's important as well, because it's like if you state something like I feel confused, or I feel frustrated, or I feel upset in this situation, then it's very difficult to challenge that, because that is your internal situation. That's your internal emotion that is playing a role, and you're entitled to feel that way. It might not necessarily be the other person's intention to make you feel that way, but that is how that situation is making you feel, and it allows that person to, as it were, to have a glimpse and insight into what you are experiencing as a result of their behavior, their words, or their actions. And then after you've said how the situation makes you feel, then it's important to state your needs. Now, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can say, I need you to, or I would appreciate if. And then you can say, you consider how saying something like that would make me feel, or how I'd appreciate it if you give me time to try and calm that baby down and develop on my parenting skills, because essentially I'm going to be around for quite a while, and so it's I'd like to get this under the thumb, as it were, or that if instead of walking away, I'd like for you to stay and tell me what's on your mind. So these, then we express our needs, because essentially a lot of disharmony and incongruence comes from ourselves individually when our needs are challenged. And in the case of parenting, then it can be the need to feel secure in your role. It could be the need to guard your own boundaries. It could be and especially in communication, the need to express your emotions and your needs themselves. What can also be beneficial in part of the content, and this can actually start, is that amicable approach, to actually say, like, I can understand that you've been working hard today, but when you call me an idiot, then I feel upset. It kind of, as it were, it sets a tone of recognition. It sets a tone of that you recognise where they're coming from, but that their behaviour or their words are still having an impact. So there are a couple of very basic sort of communication guidelines that can be taken. So that's that. Right, now I need to go back quickly to the thingy. Okay, once more. So feel free to read that. If anyone's got any questions after today, then do feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to answer questions. The last one is support. And support can come in many forms. Support can be it can be reaching out to your social network. It can be asking for support from your partner. It can be that support, that request of that need of support. Let's see. Yeah, it is very similar, Claire. Nonviolent communication. It does. It does take a long time, and it takes quite a bit of practice. And it's like these things can also be like these handouts they can be shared between partners. It isn't necessarily a key for one person to know it and the other like to keep a secret from the other. It can be a good way of communicating things in a healthy adult way. Because it also, if there's misunderstanding, then it can it's immediately clear to the other partner, if they say, oh, well, when you say that, then I feel this. It's like, oh, well, that's not what I was trying to achieve. I was trying to achieve this. Oh, okay, well, I didn't understand that. So then you can clear things up a lot faster, and it can potentially save a lot of headaches. So the sorry. Go back to which way are we going now? There we go. Back to support. In the Netherlands, over in the Netherlands, I started a Papa social evening where a group of expats, international fathers, would get together and have a few drinks. And I've also organised a few meetups for a few guys where we've talked more about fatherhood issues. That's also led to other guys from the group just making friends as well, just having other fathers that they can talk to. Especially when we're a group, when you're a group of internationals in a foreign country, then sometimes that can be quite pleasant. These groups, if they don't exist, then it can be an idea to try and organize them yourself. If there are things that you want to talk about, then maybe there are other guys in a similar situation who want to talk about them as well. Sometimes it's just a question of asking if there's any interest. But then support if the issues get more intense and there is actually a threat of a more tenacious kind of depressive disorder, or an increase of anxiety or any mental health issue which affects functioning. So where the actual care for the child, or the ability to work, or the ability to interact with other people is becoming more and more difficult, then professional support is really advised. And yeah, going back to Jameer's question before, it's then down to the individual. Sometimes people need a little bit of a push. Sometimes people are happy to be, as it were, for things to be highlighted to them that they need that kind of support. But essentially, it's important that individuals put themselves forward for that support as well. And any therapy that focuses on challenging negative views of the self or the situation, things that are done more in things like cognitive behavioural therapy or in rational emotive behavioural therapy, the idea of coming to terms with a change in status or role, more interpersonal psychotherapy, or again CBT can be a very valuable tool in that. Or if there are maladaptive beliefs which have developed from a younger age, then a focus like schema therapy could be more important, as that can have a potential more of a long lasting effect on the view of the situation. So these are and there are also these are just the therapies that I obviously work with, so I know more about these. But there are many other therapy forms out there that can be beneficial in this case. But I focus more on the behavioural ones, cognitive behavioural. There is I am currently working on a workshop as well. That's in development, and that's something that I've been discussing with Lana. It's been taking me a while. I'm one of those guys that likes to think these things through. But I'm getting there with it. So and that is going to be a combination of a lot of these therapy forms in that workshop. So that's and that will appear on the platform, I believe, at some point.
Yes, the Visibly Engaged platform. Yes.
So that is me talked out. And yeah, I knew it would take me longer than an hour. Sorry about that. It is a very intensive subject. There's loads and loads of information there. Does anyone have any further questions, or do I have any partnerships in hospitals, midwives, offices? No, not at the moment. I don't. No, I work together with a group called Access. So no, actually, that's not true. I work together with a group called Access, and Access offer childbirth preparation courses, and I do have some connection with the people who give those. They're like prenatal courses, and I have connections with the people who offer those prenatal courses. One of them who's a former midwife. And I've spoken to her before about this, and she was also very interested in a little bit more information for fathers. Any more questions from anyone, or any comments, or?
I'm adding the Access website here for those who are interested.
That's the Access website.
So I think one of the things that also got, really struck with me was the hormonal changes. Yeah, I was really surprised with that there are quite a lot of hormonal changes in men during that period. So just having that brought out in the open has already, like, wow, there's more to it than we really know about.
Yeah, well, that was one thing that really surprised me when I first found the first papers that indicated that, and obviously it's different with every man. So it's as it's different with every woman who goes through a pregnancy and birth. But these were in the researches that I read. These were some of the changes that I found, and it kind of like I say, it challenged that whole idea in me as well. I just thought it would be more focused on the psychological and social aspects, but there is a very large biological element as well.
Are there other questions from the group? I know we did go way beyond the time, and I'm very grateful for Stephen's time on doing this, and also for all your time. Like what Stephen said, if you have questions, you can message him directly in the platform itself. So we're now connected in the platform, so you can start the messaging in the course if you have questions, and if you have also other things that comes up for you after this parenting talk. I guess if I would like to know if there are more questions coming up.
No, I wanted to thank you, Stephen, for the great talk, and it was cool to definitely took away some nuggets from this. I think things I've heard before, but sometimes it's a matter of like framing. I also noticed that it was similar to nonviolent MVC, nonviolent communication. And I started reading that book and was intending to go to some courses, but it's a deep process. So it's nice to see it kind of distilled a little bit, especially for someone like me that process things in smaller nuggets sometimes in terms of creating habit. But it would be neat, I think, Lana, maybe to do a shorter follow-up at some point with everyone on a call where we could discuss, because I think this is good and we can all digest and think about, but it might be neat, just a suggestion to have a shorter follow-up whereby we could kind of talk about practical things happening and have a bit of a support share going on. Just a thought beyond, obviously there's the learning feed that we can do that on, but I feel like one more in-person thing could be cool.
Yeah.
So.
Stephen,
I'd definitely be willing to do it.
Yeah, probably we can discuss that. I mean, there's, in the She Dares group that I administer, we're already thinking of having women's circles. Maybe we can have a men's circle and, have you take the lead, and I'll give you, the reins to do it, and, have a men's night for you guys to really discuss on things.
Lana, I think he dares is forming, from what I understand. This is what I think I'm hearing. Boris will comment, but
So thank you for your, for sharing this. I guess this is also the part where I would like to wrap things up. And if you can share, a word or two, or a sentence about what you got out of it. So Jeremy was finished, and I'm going through the people that I see immediately. Honey, Boris, can you share, some words from this experience?
Yeah, I got the mic again. Yeah, it's a lot of information to take in, to digest that. What struck me with the form that is used for women, and the use of the wording in the text there, I do feel that the wording, well, for me at least, doesn't really work. So it would be interesting to go into that. But yeah, a lot of information, a lot of good points to take along and to think about. So thank you very much.
Lana, you're muted.
Claire?
Yes. Yes, well, obviously I found it very interesting because I see a lot of fathers like that in my work, and the tools and the what you advise is something I try to use. So it's very interesting, and I really want to organize something together after my maternity leave with parents, a workshop or something. I think we can do something together, and I really would like to pass on information to the parents I work with. And I see that the principal limit to that is that fathers sometimes the fathers I see around me, they are not ready to accept that they can also suffer. And I think it's good to do something so that they know it's okay.
Yeah.
They can feel this way. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome. But I will have to go now. I'm sorry. I will leave the conversation.
No problem.
Okay.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
And Jameer?
Yes, it's really interesting. I'm thinking now because I work with domestic abuse situations, and even looking in my own situation, maybe it's a preventative measure if we're able to identify that, it's not just the moms, but it's also probably the dads who are going through this. And if maybe they do a Dutch version of this questionnaire, or just give the awareness. And maybe it's, because sometimes I was looking at the subtle passive aggressive communication, and that can sometimes be the start, I guess, in some abuse situations where there's frustration, and then it piles up, and then it leads to physical abuse. So it's not psychological, but it's also the physical. But then if the underlying problem, like this depression, and let's say in a dad, then if he's willing to get help, then maybe we can prevent the escalation to abuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's very useful. It's just enlightening, and I think it really needs to get out there. We need to get it out there, Stephen.
Thank you, Jam. Let's see.
Well, that's what we're doing. One webinar at a time.
Exactly. And then Eleonora. I don't know if El, are you there? Yep, there you go.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm still understanding how this platform works. So thank you for this webinar. It was very interesting to see the point of view of that, being a mom. And I think anything that can help fight stigma against depression and mental illness is very needed. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. And she's actually together with her husband, Alessandro.
Yeah, it's Irayana, I guess. Hi, good evening, everybody.
Hi.
Because we are, Eleonora, can you cut the sound
the way they go.
Thank you. Sorry. So thanks, Stephen. It was helpful, and I was into therapy lately for these kind of problems. It's not postnatal because my kids are 6 and 3.5, so not really postnatal. But I had some issues with depression lately because of several different reasons. So I have to say that therapy helped a lot, and I don't think I could have passed through that period without therapy, honestly. And trust me, I'm not the therapy kind of person. So just to
good to hear that you reached out and sought that support as well. So
because I recognize several topics that I went through with my therapist into your presentation, actually. So, I mean, it's those are very good tools to deal with this, with those moments, when things go south.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you also for being here. And then we have Edwin.
Yeah, first of all, also big thanks from me. Definitely heard a lot of interesting and useful items, I think. I definitely recognize what the last person said. I don't see myself as a therapy person either, but I did have some sessions with my wife and also some individual, and also for me it helped me greatly. I think the biggest thing for me is that looking back, it definitely puts some stuff into a perspective.
Good.
Very nice.
Good to hear.
Thank you. And Stephen, how was the experience for you?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's my first webinar, so it's been a really positive experience. So it's good to get the feedback as well. Like it's something that I like seeing individual clients myself. I hear that quite a bit from people who are saying that they're not really therapy types, or that they that it takes them a lot of that there's this kind of stigma around seeking some support from someone else. Words I hear frequently are words of like weakness and failure, and the one thing I always highlight to people who actually take the step to seek support and to seek therapy when it's necessary is actually strength. It takes a massive faith to reach out and seek support from what is, to start with, a complete stranger, and to then experience it in a positive way is great to hear. And it's hopeful that other people experience that same thing, and well done to everyone who takes that step.
Yes, and this is also why, one of the reasons why we're doing this, to make it as a low threshold for people to just start doing, start having these conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you very much for everyone who have, taken the time and the space to really deal into this topic. We will be having another, parenting course with Claire, or she jumped out already and talking about the sibling rivalry. So we'll do that session relatively soon. That will be next week. So that's something to look forward to. And I would suggest, for those for those of you who are here, please do, write in your learning feed. It's in a sense, you would see it when you log in. You would see, your access for this course. You can write in the course itself your insights about what you did, and this is a pay what you can, or in a donation basis. We're doing this out of Stephen's generosity, and this is something that we'd want to continue doing. So if this has some given you merit, and you would like to to spread the word more, this would help us, with the platform, with the continuity for the platform, at the same time to give something, as a gift for Stephen. All this information you would find in the course itself. Um, the handout that was given is already uploaded, and I think there's a request from Jeremy if you can have also the deck, if that was also possible for us to share. So we'll also upload that, and there's
Yep.
also report, evaluation for this event. So thank you very much, everyone, until the next parenting talk.
I was going to just make one suggestion, Lana, that if you go to the homepage on the site, I know how the site works, I guess, but you'll see that everybody joined the call, and you could just make a comment, like a takeaway or something that after reflecting is always fun, to do. So people can that stays there, and people can see each other's thoughts after reflection. It would be neat. So
in essence, that is the parenting community that we're building. So if you can comment there, we get to see, each other's comments and insights from today. So
thanks again, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.